Virginia Dway recalled one event where Andrew orchestrated a game involving women being blindfolded and paraded into a room. What was pitched as playful soon turned invasive, as Andrew made crass jokes and violated personal boundaries under the guise of fun. The staff and guests present were paralyzed, not by amusement, but by protocol. His royal status turned discomfort into complicity, silencing dissent and protecting behavior that many now describe as misogynistic and cruel.
If you want more unfiltered royal truth, not the palace-approved version, hit like, subscribe and tell us in the comments, are Beatrice and Eugenie breaking the cycle or repeating history? Stay tuned. The tea only gets hotter.
Antics, further underlining how deep the problem ran. The normalization of his behavior is a damning reflection on the institution that shielded him. There's Scandal then there's whatever this is. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor didn't just fall from royal grace, he bulldozed through every warning sign on the way down. What we're dealing with here isn't a one-time lapse in judgment, or even a pattern of awkward behavior. This is decades of documented misconduct, lewd pranks, and humiliating antics that were allowed to flourish under the protective cloak of royal privilege. Let's not pretend any of this is shocking to the people who were around him. According to those closest to the chaos, journalists, insiders, even witnesses, Andrew's behavior was a constant source of discomfort and secondhand embarrassment. It started when he was young and somehow only got worse with age. A royal who behaved more like an attention-seeking teenager at a house party than a grown man carrying out ceremonial duties. We're talking about someone who thought it was entertaining to unzip women's dresses at parties. Not ask, not flirt and zip, without permission, as if their dignity was just another punchline. He reportedly stormed through private corridors at gatherings, opening doors, peeking into rooms, barging into personal spaces that were never his to claim. His excuse? He didn't need one. When you grow up being told the world belongs to you, why would you think boundaries apply? The behaviors that make headlines now, the food shoving, the fire extinguisher spraying, the mustard explosions, were never really funny. They were humiliating, juvenile, and yet, time after time, Andrew got a pass. A royal pass. The kind that turns discomfort into eccentricity and misconduct into boys will be boys. All while people on the receiving end, mostly women and low-ranking staff, were left to deal with the fallout. He didn't reserve these stunts for private parties, either. He brought the same chaotic energy to formal events and international visits. During a royal trip to Egypt, while representing the monarchy, he reportedly swam fully clothed in a bizarre stunt that had no place in a diplomatic setting. He gave too much attention to another guest's wife, making those around him deeply uncomfortable. And during ceremonial functions, things like museum openings or royal galas, Andrew allegedly disrupted proceedings with immature jokes that had no place in such environments. It's hard to overstate how inappropriate this was. Royals are expected to exude decorum, grace, and respect for the occasion. But Andrew treated it like a bit of a joke. And worse, he got away with it. Over and over again. The atmosphere he created was unsettling, particularly for women. His games and jokes weren't lighthearted, they were power plays disguised as humor. According to multiple sources, he often made coarse remarks about women's underwear at dinners. He orchestrated childish party games that left people squirming in discomfort. He reportedly targeted women with these stunts, knowing they couldn't push back. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. This wasn't some isolated problem that appeared out of nowhere. This was a long-standing pattern, one that insiders describe as boorish, juvenile, and boundaryless. And it wasn't just known, it was widely known. The palace didn't miss it. High-ranking aides, senior confidants, royal staff, they all knew what kind of person Andrew had become behind closed doors. And still, nothing was done. Nothing meaningful, at least. Which brings us to the bigger issue, the institution. The culture of silence and protection that allowed him to behave this way for so long. The same palace that claims to be a symbol of stability and tradition was quietly enabling misconduct that stretched across decades. This wasn't just about Andrew being entitled. This was about an entire system shielding him from the consequences of that entitlement. And then came the tipping point, the scandals that could no longer be buried under palace statements or PR cleanup. His connection to Jeffrey Epstein was the breaking wave. Allegations of sex trafficking, publicized relationships with individuals at the heart of one of the most high-profile criminal investigations in the world. And still, Andrew denied everything. Still, he insisted he had done nothing wrong, but the damage was done. And when Virginia Giuffre released her autobiography, Naming Andrew and laying out disturbing allegations, the royal family had no more room to spin. The palace couldn't downplay it as childish behavior anymore. It was serious, it was international, and it had receipts.
If you want more unfiltered royal truth, not the palace-approved version, hit like, subscribe and tell us in the comments, are Beatrice and Eugenie breaking the cycle or repeating history? Stay tuned. The tea only gets hotter.
The public backlash made it impossible to ignore. This wasn't leadership, it was damage control. By then, everyone had started asking the question the palace was hoping to avoid. Why wasn't this addressed earlier? Because the truth is, Andrew's behavior humiliating guests, degrading women, embarrassing the monarchy had been allowed to thrive in the shadows. And those shadows were cast not by his own charisma or cleverness, but by the institution that bent over backwards to protect him. People like Lord Peter Rosslyn, senior figures and close aides knew what was happening. They may not have participated, but silence can be just as complicit. The royal family didn't just fail to intervene. They reinforced the problem by refusing to treat it as one. Andrew's pranks were laughed off. His crude jokes were tolerated. His invasiveness was dismissed as personality. And that's the culture we're talking about. One that coddles the powerful and punishes the truth. Even when women were pushed into food. Even when staff felt targeted. Even when rooms were invaded and private moments became uncomfortable memories, the official line stayed the same. Business as usual. But now, the royal establishment wants you to believe this is a turning point. That stripping Andrew of his titles somehow closes the chapter. That the consequences finally caught up. But let's not confuse symbolism with real accountability. This isn't resolution, it's fallout. And what it reveals is a monarchy that failed to self-correct until it was too late. The real cost: decades of unchecked misconduct. A culture that protected privilege over principle. And victims named and unnamed who were forced to endure years of discomfort, dismissal, and silence. So where does this all lead? It leads to a critical moment of reckoning. One where the palace can no longer hide behind tradition or duty. Because now, the public knows the cost of that silence. Now, the public is asking questions. How many more stories have yet to come out? How many other powerful figures were protected under the same system? And who's still being shielded today? Andrew isn't just a fallen royal. He's the symptom of something much deeper. A culture that rewards status over accountability. That protects the powerful and leaves everyone else to pick up the pieces. If the monarchy wants to survive in the modern era, this can't happen again. The institution has to evolve. It has to prioritize transparency over image, action over appearance. Because what Andrew did and what was allowed can't be swept away with one press release. This isn't just about public embarrassment. It's about public trust. So if you've been following the story, if you've watched the headlines pile up, the testimonies emerge, the excuses crumble, then you know this isn't the end. It's the beginning of something bigger, and we want to hear from you. Should the palace have taken action years ago? Are there more stories like this being buried? And what does this say about power, privilege, and the people who protect both? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're all watching this unfold together. If you're into uncovering the truths behind polished facades, exposing what the press release won't say, and making sense of the chaos they want you to forget, hit that like button, subscribe, share. This isn't just scandal. This is a system cracking open. And you're not going to want to miss what comes next. Here's the thing no one inside the palace ever really wanted to admit. Andrew didn't just slip through the cracks. He was the crack. Everything about the way he was handled, from the shrugged shoulders to the decades-long enabling, screams one thing. Protect the brand, no matter the cost. Protect the name, the titles, the crest on the wall. And if a few women got humiliated, or staff were left feeling violated, or witnesses were made to keep their mouths shut, that was just collateral damage in service of the crown. But how did it get this far? The signs were there from the beginning. Not subtle ones, either. We're talking about invasive behavior at parties, walking down halls, opening bedroom doors, catching people off guard in private spaces. That's not mischief. That's not poor judgment. That's calculated boundary pushing. Over and over again. Then there were the stunts, pushing people's faces into their food, unzipping dresses without consent, spraying women with fire extinguishers. Crude, humiliating, and always performed with that same smug confidence. You won't stop me. You can't stop me. Because in his mind, the royal shield would always be stronger than the consequences. And for a while, it was. This wasn't some hidden double life. Andrew's behavior was a recurring pattern, known by insiders, witnessed by staff, and often whispered about in elite social circles. Yet somehow, every incident became just another quirky footnote in the saga of the Queen's wayward son. He weaponized his status. He used it like armor, and the palace let him. That's the part that burns. Because if anyone else, any random official or celebrity or corporate figure had behaved like this at events during formal dinners or on international trips, they'd be blacklisted instantly. But Andrew, he kept getting invited, kept making speeches, kept representing the country. Like nothing ever happened. The reports from his official travels are just as damning. Like the Egypt visit, where instead of maintaining any semblance of professional conduct, Andrew chose to act like the class clown, swimming fully clothed, drawing attention to someone else's wife, behaving in ways that embarrassed everyone around him, all while supposedly serving as a representative of Britain abroad. And yet again, no consequences, no public scolding, no private intervention worth mentioning. Just more behind-the-scenes damage control and some nervous laughter. This is where the palace's protective machine kicks into overdrive. Royal aides, advisors, and figures like Lord Peter Rosslyn may not have orchestrated his behavior, but they knew. They knew. They saw it, heard about it, dealt with the aftershocks. And instead of addressing it, they downplayed it, dismissed it, labeled it as juvenile provocation, as if slapping a polite term on it made it less disturbing. It didn't. Because for the women at those parties, being mocked, invaded, humiliated, it wasn't a prank. It was a violation. And for staff members forced to smile through the chaos, it was a job made 10 times harder by one man who thought boundaries didn't apply to him. The misogyny was always front and center. This wasn't about harmless fun. Andrew repeatedly targeted women with degrading humor, crude remarks about their underwear, orchestrated party games designed to embarrass, physical stunts meant to humiliate. Every act fed into a toxic loop. Belittle, dominate, move on. And no one around him told him to stop. Not in any way that actually mattered. Because saying something meant risking your position, your access, your proximity to power. So people looked the other way, or whispered behind his back, or tried to convince themselves it wasn't that bad. But it was that bad. And it went on for years. Until it couldn't anymore. What finally forced the institution's hand wasn't the decades of known misconduct. It wasn't the discomfort of guests or the humiliation of women. It was the connection to Jeffrey Epstein, the international scandal that drew global scrutiny. The moment Andrew's name was linked with Epstein, everything changed. Suddenly the palace couldn't hide behind charm or tradition. Suddenly the public was paying attention. And what they found wasn't just a sketchy friendship, it was a thread that unraveled a much larger, much darker narrative. Virginia Giuffre's autobiography turned whispers into alarms. Her account, naming Andrew directly, added weight to the allegations that had long swirled around him. The denials came fast, but the damage was already done. The infamous BBC interview, the one that was supposed to clear his name, only made things worse. Watching Andrew fumble through excuses, claim he couldn't sweat, and try to distance himself from events that were backed by photographs and timelines. It was a PR disaster of historic proportions. That interview didn't save him. It sealed his fate. And finally the monarchy acted. In November, King Charles stripped Andrew of his royal titles and privileges. Years too late, yes, but it was a move the institution had no choice but to make. But let's not confuse this moment with justice. This wasn't about accountability. It was about survival. The monarchy was in PR freefall. They needed a scapegoat, a gesture, something to show the public they could still draw a line. Andrew's downfall was performative. It wasn't the result of introspection or moral clarity. It was the unavoidable end of a scandal they could no longer contain. And still, they've never truly addressed the years of enabling. They've never acknowledged how many people were harmed, how many warnings were ignored, or how long this behavior was tolerated for the sake of keeping up appearances. Because that's the part that leaves the deepest scar. The silence, the complicity, the knowledge that none of this had to happen this way. If the palace had listened years ago, if insiders had taken the behavior seriously, maybe the Epstein connection never would have happened. Maybe the public embarrassment could have been prevented. Maybe people wouldn't still be asking how someone with so many red flags stayed in the royal fold for so long. But here we are. And now the monarchy wants to close the book. To erase the past with a few carefully worded statements and a quiet exile. But that's not enough. Not when the pattern is this deep. Not when the damage is this widespread. The real question isn't just what did Andrew do, it's how many people let it happen. How many watched and stayed quiet? And how many more stories are still buried under royal carpets? Because Andrew's downfall isn't just his own. It exposes a system that protects its own, no matter who gets hurt in the process. And if the public hadn't turned up the heat, if the press hadn't exposed the connections, if the victims hadn't spoken out, he'd probably still be making appearances, still making jokes, still coasting on a title that once gave him untouchable status. So now, we ask, what changes? Does the monarchy learn from this? Or does it wait for the next scandal to erupt? Because let's be honest, the problem wasn't just Andrew. It was the silence, the privilege, and the entitlement that built him. And unless those things are addressed head-on, this story won't be a one-off. It'll be a blueprint. If you followed this entire saga, if you've watched this royal train wreck unfold in real time, then you already know it's not over. Not really. The palace may have stripped him of his titles, but the questions are still hanging in the air. Was this justice, or just a brand-saving exercise? Did the palace act, or react? And how many more Andrews are hiding behind the curtain? Here's what still stings the most about this entire saga. None of it had to go this far. Andrew's behavior didn't explode out of nowhere in 2019. It had been festering for decades, right in front of everyone. The parties, the crude jokes, the humiliations, the entitlement, it was all part of the package. A walking, talking red flag, gift wrapped in royal prestige. And yet, every time he crossed a line, it was brushed off. He's just being Andrew, they'd say. A chuckle here, an awkward glance there, but no one with power ever truly stepped in. And the longer it went on, the more emboldened he became. Because why would he stop? He never faced consequences. There were no real reprimands when he humiliated guests at private dinners. No press statements when he sprayed women with fire extinguishers at palace parties. No serious internal action when he made degrading remarks or crashed through private rooms like a prince on a scavenger hunt. The behavior kept escalating because the message was always the same: you're safe. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, you're officially part of the small percentage of people who don't just click away, and that means a lot. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts, your ideas, or even what you'd like to see next. I read every single one of them, and your feedback genuinely shapes the direction of this channel. If you enjoyed the video, tap that like button. It tells YouTube this content is worth sharing. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. We've got more exciting videos coming, and trust me, you'll want to be here for them. This channel is just getting started, and your support helps it grow faster than you realize. Thank you again for spending a part of your day here with me. Stay curious, stay motivated, and as always, take care of yourself. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.